Okay, just want to touch on the book of Daniel a little bit more. I know we talked briefly about this in the lecture, and I sure hope that you had a chance to listen to the sermon that I preached on Daniel chapter 1 for the School of Theology and Christian Ministry departmental chapel that was a couple of years ago. But I just wanted to really kind of do a quick outline of Daniel in terms of historical context and overall message, in case that didn't come through clear enough. So got it outlined up here on the board. And so one way to think about it to start with is the life of Daniel. And so Daniel is taken into captivity to Babylon about 605 BC, and he spends the next 70 years in Babylon. And so his adult life, 70 years in Babylon as quote unquote a captive. Now, 609 is when the Babylonians took over the kingdom of Judah. 609 is when Jehoiakim became king. He was placed there by the Egyptians. And then in about 606, 605, that's when the Babylonians took over, and they let Jehoiakim stay on the throne, but they took captive a number of people, as well as lots of silver and gold that they took back to Babylon. And so Daniel was one of those that was taken captive to Babylon. He and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So he spends all this time in Babylon. 598, that's when Jehoiakim surrenders. It's when Ezekiel goes to Babylon. And Zedekiah is placed on the throne as the next vassal king. 587, that's when Jerusalem is destroyed. And of course, you know, Ezekiel's taken captive in 598. Jeremiah is prophesying all across here in Jerusalem. But Daniel, he's out of there. He's in Babylon. He's working for the Babylonians, being educated, brought up, and service to them. 539, Cyrus comes to power. And Daniel begins to work for Cyrus. And so Cyrus takes over. Daniel is brought under Cyrus's regime. And so the last vision that Daniel has, the last date in Daniel, comes in chapter 10, and it's in the third reign of Cyrus, king of Persia. So somewhere around 536, 535. So these dates are kind of ballpark figures. So basically 70 years in Babylon. Now, then the question becomes, okay, when was the book written and who was the book written for? So we have the stories about Daniel, we have Daniel's vision, but clearly it couldn't have been written up, you know, in final form until after at least the last event is named. So it's written for the Persian context. And so this would be context number one, that here you have the life of Daniel. Maybe he's writing stuff, maybe he gives it kind of a final edition, but he kind of writes it for those who are in the Persian context. And so Persia is a dominant empire, and Daniel is basically how to live under a foreign rule. And so he takes his stories, he takes his dreams, his visions, the interpretation, and all of it is designed to kind of answer this question: as a people of God, how do we live under a foreign rule? You know, we don't have a Davidic king, we're still under foreign rule. So whether we're in Jerusalem, whether we're in Persia, that we're still kind of under the control of a foreign power. How do we function? How do we live? So Daniel answers that question, and in a word or two, it's you are in the world, but not of the world. And so the whole message is to stay faithful, that the Lord reigns, and even though you're under a foreign rule, make sure you stay faithful. You can engage in the world, but make sure that you never become of the world. Okay, then others would say that because of some of the stuff in the visions, that it especially looks forward to the time where the Greeks dominate, and we have Alexander the Great, that goat, if you will, coming from the west and coming east and taking over Persia. And so that it's really written and addressing out there in the future. And then as you get deeper into it, you discover that it really speaks into this time of Antiochus Epiphanes, around 175 to 164, when it is a context of intense persecution. Okay, so context number one, you are just under a foreign rule. But context number two And some would say that this is when it's written, that all of these stories and visions that Daniel had, that they're all pulled forward and it's addressing this time period. And so it's a new context. You're not simply under foreign rule, but you're under intense persecution. And the message is victory is coming. That don't cave in, don't compromise, don't join the world, still be in the world, not of the world, and have the assurance that victory is coming. So that you are going to stay faithful because the Lord reigns. And the message is, God is Lord over history, and God is bringing God's kingdom. And so don't despair, don't compromise, don't cave in, stay faithful. So just really quick overview of kind of possible historical context for Daniel, and I'll let it go at that. Have a great rest of the day.